All right, I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Appropriations Subcommittee to order. I apologize to the chair lady. That's the first time I ever scared her. But sorry about that. I should have given her fair warning. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll for the members that are here?
Representatives Campbell, Faison, Garrett, Hazelwood, Hicks, Miller, Sexton, Shaw, Sparks, Zachary, Chairman Williams. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you to the clerk for coming here. Do the members have any personal orders? Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's hearing. Today's hearing is centered around two different subject matters. One, which is already a part of current state statute as it relates to community investment tax credits. The subject matter today was brought to the attention of the chair lady, vice chairman, chairman of Appropriations Sub, and I over the summer about questions regarding the utilization of community investment tax credits and what their original intent was back, I think, in 2016, implementation in 2017. But anyways, we've asked Commissioner Giargano to come with his staff to talk a little bit about community investment tax credits. So if you'll come on up, you and your staff that want to be here to testify in a hearing. And if you would please, of course, we all know who you are, but go ahead for the record and introduce yourselves. The members should know that a copy of the presentation, which they're giving, is on the dashboard, so you're more than welcome to get that information. Gentlemen, thank you for coming, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm David Giargano, Commissioner of Revenue. I have with me today Sean Davis on my immediate right. He's a tax auditor, and Randy Hilliard on my far right is a tax audit manager. And I'm going to cover at a high level the community investment tax credits. Sean and Randy are the folks who administer this on a day-to-day basis and know a lot more of the details, and will be here to help me with your questions. Mr. Chairman, this first slide is just an overview of the number of taxpayers and the amounts of community investment tax credits, or the CITC, as we call it, over the last 5 years. I think the notable thing on this slide is the amount by which the total credits claimed have increased over the last 5 years, and we may get into that a little bit more in a moment. The credit is it's a credit taken by financial institutions that offset their franchise and excise tax liability, and there are really two separate subsections in the code and two separate sort of elements to the possible credit. And the first is for eligible housing entities. It's basically a credit to incentivize low-income housing loans. And the second one is the Community Development Financial Institution portion of it, the CDFI, which works similarly. It's there to incentivize loans, but instead of for low-income housing, it's for community development activities such as small business loans and that sort of thing. Turning first to the housing credit, THDA actually certifies the eligible housing entity and the eligible housing activity. The amount of credit available to the financial institution is based on their low interest loans that are made. So qualified loans are defined as loans that are 2% below prime, and qualified loans are 2% below prime. Qualified low rate loans are 4% below prime. And the type of loan that's made impacts the amount of the credit, as we'll get to in just a moment. Eligible housing entities generally include 501c3s. And we do see some public housing authorities also come to us as eligible housing entities. And the activities, in essence, are to support low-income housing and help low-income Tennesseans obtain affordable housing. Turning back to the CDFI part of the CITC credit, these are also available to financial institutions for making low-rate loans or qualified loans or qualified low-rate loans, both at the same levels as I mentioned before, either 2% below prime or 4% below prime. The work, the financial institution making the low rate loan and receiving the credit can choose whether to take it as a one-time credit or an annual credit. So the amount, if they take it as a one-time credit, it's either 5% or 10% of the loan amount on a one-time basis. So it's 5% of the loan amount. The credit equals 5% of the loan amount if it's a qualified loan, i.e., 2% below prime, or 10% of the loan amount if it's a qualified low-rate loan, i.e., 4% below prime. For the one-time credit, if the entire amount of the credit is not used on that year's tax return, it can be carried forward for up to 15 years. In the choice of financial institutions on the amount of the unpaid balance of the loan each year for 15 years. And the calculation of the credit is 3% loan or 5% of a qualified low-rate loan. There's no carry forward. You simply calculate the credit for a given tax year, but you can do that annually for 15 years. The THDA, or the affordable housing portion of the CITC, as far as the process, THDA verifies the eligible housing entity status, the 501c3 status as a eligible entity, and also the eligible activity and the amount. So they initially receive the application and are really analyzing it from a substantive point of view as far as the entity and the use of the funds. And then if they approve it, it comes to the department. We sort of do a second review. And if everything is in order, then the credit is approved and we administer the credit from there. And the financial institution takes that on their annual F&E return and we track it from there. Similarly, for the CDFI portion of the CITC, except this is actually administered, the CDFIs are approved and regulated by the U.S. Department of Treasury. So if a bank makes a low interest loan to a CDFI, we basically piggyback on the federal government's regulation of the CDFI and the use of the funds and that sort of thing. In essence, what we're looking for is that the bank has made the loan to a properly certified by the federal government CDFI, and if that's the case and it meets the below prime rate, then the credit is approved and administered, and they take it on their return, and we track it from there. Quick analysis of the uses. It's almost 50%. It's a little over 40% housing-related tax credits and a little over 50% CDFI related. That is, the CDFI portion of that has grown in recent years. Several years ago, it was almost exclusively housing related. The housing related is maintained. It hasn't decreased, but the CDFI has really increased, and now it's about 50-50. You can see on those percentages, I won't go through them all, but they're there for your reference. You can see that between the two, right at 80% of all the credits claimed are that annual credit that I mentioned. And Mr. Chairman, just sort of a concluding slide. Again, we just put together over the last 5 years, about $180 million in community investment tax credits have been claimed. That's about 16% of all F&E credits. If you look at our sort of suite of F&E credits, including job tax credit and industrial machinery credit and these and some others, these amount to about 16.5% over a 5-year period. But you can see that percentage has increased in recent years, with the most recent year being a little over 25% of the total credits claimed against F&E returns. And I think over that period, there are about 83 different financial institutions that have claimed the credit sometime during that 5-year period. With that, Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to answer any questions. What we do, of course, is more on the administrative side. I think there are others probably better suited to talk about the benefits and the use of those funds that are generated and that sort of thing. But we'll be happy to try to answer any questions we can.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think probably in an effort to save time, because we do have another presentation, I think we're going to hear from THDA first. They have a short presentation just to update from their perspective about these investment tax credits. And so if you guys just want to hang out for a minute, we'll grab questions after that from the members as they have them. But thank you guys for coming today. This is THDA, Ralph Perry, the director. A good friend of ours at Habitat, but also a good friend of mine as well. He couldn't be here because he had to go deal with Potomac fever in Washington, D.C. So he sent these two individuals. So if y'all would introduce yourselves again to the committee. Of course, I know who you are. And for the record, and then go ahead and start with your presentation today.
Thank you for inviting us for your interest in the Community Investment Tax Credit. My name is Don Watt. I'm the Chief Program Officer at THDA.
And I'm Katie Moore, Government Affairs.
So the CITC is an important tool to further private investment in affordable housing across the state. Over the last 5 years, the program has encouraged the private investment of slightly over $1 billion to create or preserve nearly 11,000 affordable housing units across the state. It's an average annual investment of $219 million. So we're very pleased by that. As Commissioner Giargano indicated, our role in this process is to qualify the applicant and the project as meeting the CITC guidelines. And since 2014, we have certainly seen an increase in the use of the CITC to encourage private investment. Both the affordable housing development community as well as financial institutions are increasingly aware of this resource. THDA regularly promotes the resource at our grant program application workshops with nonprofit housing developers and at other venues and one-on-one conversations with financial institutions. It's important to note that the CITC is really an important tool because many nonprofits and public housing authorities, when they're working on affordable housing developments, they have to layer a variety of different financing. Most of the financing often comes through grants or the low-income housing tax credit. However, the CITC is an important gap filler because it's a resource that comes with minimal extra strings attached, and therefore it can be easily layered with the other resources that they have. However, the financing received that meets the CITC requirements, again, is much more flexible, and therefore it makes those deals much less complicated for the developer. Additionally, we're seeing developments that benefited from the CITC are increasingly larger. In 2017, the average size of the project was about 27 units. But in 2021, the average size of the units rose back up to 50. We had a slight decline as a result of the pandemic, and then it increased in 2021 again. In correlation with increases in the average size of the developments, the average size of the private investment, though, is increasing both in urban and rural areas. Generally, the average in 2017, the private investment generated was $1.9 million. In 2021, it had risen to $7.6 million. These trends also correlate with the increased involvement of developers associated with the low-income housing credit program. From 2014 to 2017, we would receive, on average, 5 developments annually that receive both the housing credit as well as the CITC. However, between 2018 and 2021, an average of 11 developments received both resources. And in fact, that actually increases to 13 if you exclude the year 2020 when the application pool was very low. So we do suspect that the increase in housing credit developments in the CITC program may be due to the increase per unit cost of development. We have seen that swelled considerably. In 2014, we saw that both for housing credit developments and those CITC developments without the housing credits, the average per unit cost was right around $50,000, slightly higher if it had housing tax credits and slightly lower if it didn't. However, in 2021, the average per unit costs have increased to $178,000 for a housing credit assisted development and over $131,000 for a CITC development with no housing credits. So we're seeing the price of the housing increase substantially, and it's because of the increased construction costs, increased land costs, labor costs. We've all heard the stories in the news. The program is also essential to making the units affordable, and particularly in rural areas of the state, where required program rents for the low-income housing tax credit or other federal financing programs are much too low to allow those projects to cash flow. By adding this resource that doesn't have has a lower interest rate associated with it, we're able to keep the rents lower and make those projects cash flow well. So just in closing, I'd just like to share a couple comments from our partners. From Chris Osborne, who's the Chief Operating Officer of HomeSource East Tennessee. He stated that the CITC programs helps cash flow on the property, which also helps keep the rents low. Nancy Huddleston, Executive Director of the Manchester Housing Authority, they created a development called Oakdale Apartments, which has 4 duplexes and that include 8 one-bedroom units for the elderly and disabled. And she indicated that without CITC, the property would not have been built because the cash flow for Oakdale could not have been reached. And Amy Schaffline, who's the Executive Director of United Housing down in Memphis, indicated that the cost of construction continues to outpace the appraised values in many neighborhoods, and CITC is essential incentive for banks to grant or loan at low rates in order to increase homeownership rates, provide more affordable renters, and increase the tax base. She also indicated that it was important for the banks then it was important in the development of the relationship between the nonprofit entity and the local banks. And the banks now are more involved in funding and therefore becoming invested in under-resourced communities. And finally, Betty Kirkland, who's the Executive Director of Project Return in Nashville, offered a comment that was also indicated by several individuals in indicating that we have peers in other parts of the country who are in awe of CITC and what a prime -4 lending scenario can do for affordable housing model. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss our role in it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If the members have any questions, more than happy to notify the chair. I did have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Giargano. Do you think that from this community tax, investment tax credit, that it was originally started because we were trying to hold the cost of housing down? Or do you think it was more along the lines of the partnership with banks to be able to deliver the loans? Because it seems like that over time, those two things have kind of diverted. Could you speak to that at all?
I don't know that I can speak to that with much experience. I mean, it predates when I was involved with it. It's been around for quite a few years. So I don't know that I have a unique perspective on that, to be quite candid.
I guess when I looked at the different costs, the incentive for banks to be able to do these kinds of loans is because they can distribute over time the credit associated that they're the F&E tax that they're assigned for their business over that period of time of the loan, usually of which is 10 to 15 years, which is why most of them, 74% based upon your data, do that. I guess the question is when you look at that duration of time, is the reason why we're having an increase in the utilization of this, the total number, because it looks like the total number of projects is the same. It's the same people doing bigger projects. Is that what you think it is? And those banks are taking advantage of that F&E tax credit?
Yeah, I think there's maybe a couple things. As you noted accurately, it's basically the same number of entities making qualifying loans during a given year. I think they are larger, but I think there's also a bit of a compounding impact when you think about the annual credit that's taken over a number of years. So all the loans in year one that are made play out over 15 years. Then you have the additional loans in year two that play out over 15 years and are in addition to the ones in year one that are right. So I think they do sort of accumulate, over time. So I think that's a part of the reason we've seen the increase, and probably now that will level off over a certain amount of time. Then that'll balance out, right? Because you have them falling off at the same rate they're being added onto. But I think it's this increase in the CDFI loans that is causing some of that increase that'll probably level off once we get to a new baseline.
This may not be a question for you, but I have noticed what CDFI notes that I've been involved with or had seen is that banks are assigning a certain portion of their loan portfolio, if you will, that they're utilizing these CDFIs. I guess my question is, the reason for that is because there's only a certain amount that they can deduct F&E taxes on. And so they're trying to find a sweet spot based upon each institution, with the idea that they can't loan more than they're actually paying an F&E tax. Because I guess the question is you can't ever, we're not paying anyone for F&E tax credits, obviously, if they go over that amount. But do you think that's why most banks limit the number or the amount of notes that they'll do in a CDFI?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you're probably right. I mean, basically they're loaning below prime,
right?
And then the credit is making up the difference, and I think their liability is a natural ceiling on that.
But their credit, just to clarify, their credit is the difference between what prime is and what their discounted rate is. That's what they're able to deduct. No,
no, the credit is. I probably wasn't. Man, I've been 100% clear on this. It depends on whether it's an annual or one time. For a 2% below prime loan, if you're taking an annual credit, which is the more common, then your credit is 3% of the unpaid balance.
Okay.
So 2% below prime is the qualifier. 3% of unpaid balance is the amount of the credit each year for 15 years. And then it's 5% if you're at that 4 points below prime level.
Okay. Chairlady Hazel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Giargano. It's good to see you twice in one day.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a question. The chairman mentioned, and you verified, that the numbers of projects are basically staying the same. It's just the size of the projects have increased. Are those projects, are they spread, fairly evenly across the state, or are they concentrated in particular areas? What can you tell us about that?
For that, I'm going to look to Sean and Randy and see if they can speak to that.
We have a, I'm sorry.
Please say your name for the record.
Sorry. Randy Hilliard, Tennessee Department of Revenue.
I get you.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah.
Over the course of time, we have had a very broad spectrum from the state. I don't think there's any far as just raw numbers, obviously you're always going to have more in the more populated areas as far as but I don't think there's really a disproportionate number in those areas where maybe with some other credits, like say jobs credits, where businesses are more prone to locate in those areas, you do have more disproportionate number for those credits in those areas. But this credit seems to be more evenly distributed. I don't have any statistics or any factual information. That's just based on anecdotal evidence only, but it certainly seems to be more broad, and maybe THDA may actually have some information on that too from their end. But from revenue, we haven't really tracked that type of information that I'm aware of.
Thank you. THCA, do you have a follow-up on the Chair Delay's question about the disbursement of these based upon your experience?
Yeah, we actually have a distribution probably closer to an 80-20 split between urban metro areas and rural non-metro areas.
Hazelwood.
And I guess I wasn't around as the commissioner mentioned that he wasn't when these plans were put into legislative statute, but I'm assuming that the goal was to have more low-cost housing on the market, more availability for low-cost housing. And I guess my question is, has that been successful? Has that achieved that? And if there's a way to quantify it, should we be doing more? Should we be doing less? Or, just legislatively, has this been a good tool or do we need to tweak it? Your suggestions?
Yeah, I think it's been an excellent tool. I mean, we had 11,000 units, nearly 11,000 units that were created over a 5-year period, which is really outstanding. And I think as you see from some of the comments from our partners across the state, I mean, they see it as a critical resource to be able to make their projects happen. They will frequently come to us for a grant or potentially the low-income housing tax credit, and then they'll use the CITC for additional funding to meet the gap so that they don't have to go out and get another grant, particularly with the nonprofits organizations and PHAs. They don't have to go out and get another grant to help fill the gap and then try to balance all the time, the deadlines and the requirements. They can just focus on the requirements of the central resource that they have.
And just to follow up on that, I suppose, we read about the scarcity of affordable housing across the state, and it's not just a problem in Tennessee, it's a national problem. So what I think I hear you saying is that this has been a good tool. However, whatever progress we have made may have been overshadowed by the growing need. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that's probably a fair statement.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And as a follow-on, I think the original intent, I think, was to provide affordable housing. But you shared some data that was shocking to me, and I'm in the construction business. But you talked about housing credits in 2014 were $50,000 each, and then you shared that there were somewhere between 131,000 for CITC. Now, I guess the question is, the goal of this original program was to try to make affordable housing more affordable. I guess are we able to say that even though we have these discounted rates, the cost has driven it kind of out of the market anyways? Because I don't think it's whether you're in Chattanooga, Hamilton County, Signal Mountain, or whether you're in Putnam County or even more rural Jackson County, it's going to be really difficult to find affordable housing for anyone. I guess the question is the promise that this originally was going to hold costs down, is it still as true today as it was before? I think I tend to question that when you look at such a dramatic change over the last 7 years.
Yeah. It's my impression anyway that the costs associated with the increased housing costs are independent of the program itself.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen the market even before the pandemic. We had Increased construction costs. We had MDHA, for instance, was for one of their projects. They were developing, and they had to build a parking garage, given that it was in Nashville.
Mhm.
They went from a project that was 2 years prior to another one, and the cost increased 3 times.
Mhm.
So it's the increased construction costs, it's the land costs, particularly in some areas of the state. It's the labor costs. All of those are increasing quite substantially. But this has been a good plug to be able to help those developments actually move forward.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I guess you know, the higher the construction cost, the bigger the F&E credit. But
Yeah.
it's had no impact on housing. Housing has kind of gotten lost in the equation, I guess is what I'm saying. Is it's a good way to defer expenses in the long term. I know it doesn't matter if you have one of these specialty loans or whether you have a regular mortgage, the most costly thing you're going to pay in your pie chart is your home. It's
Sure.
it's just the way it is, and if it's not as affordable or more affordable, regardless of cost of construction, it seems like that it could be that those who are distributing CDFI or CITC notes, it's gotten better for them at a higher rate of, for lack of better terms, return as it would for the actual homeowner or the person who's out there making the mortgage on behalf of the banks. So I look at it and I'm not saying I'm not for it, but I am saying that I do know that there are some other CDFI programs out there in rural markets where you're starting to see these more and more. That's kind of getting a return back to the original purpose, and that was small business lending. Whereas this has turned into, quite frankly, a housing, mostly housing instead of small business like equipment or buildings or things of that nature. So I'd like to see a return to that if we could. But I think that's all the questions I have today. Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank y'all for being here. I'm learning a lot by listening. I did have to step out, and maybe this could have been discussed. Is there, let's see how I ask this question. Is there a requirement on the lender's part to talk about you all and what y'all do? Or that, just talk about that a minute, because I have so many constituents who will come to me about affordable housing and haven't heard very much at all. So, and I think I've asked this question before to the director. How do you best get that information out, or how do I as a legislator, what's the best tool or rule for me to get that to my constituency, that it's available to those who qualify? And I hope I'm making sense. Can you help me with that a little bit?
Yes, I can try.
Okay.
I mean, our primary mechanism for the programs that we operate, for the most part, are going through the nonprofit organizations or the public housing authorities, and other grant administrators that we work with. And then they turn around and they market the program that they're operating to the constituency and their locality. It's probably just a little bit different over on the mortgage side. If Katie, you want
Well, and I'm
to
gonna
touch on
say,
that?
Representative Shaw, we've done several homebuyer education, et cetera, meetings with you, and our staff is happy to keep on doing that, getting the word out. We directly market to constituents through several of our programs. We work with program partners all across the state to try to do our very best to get the resources into the hands that need them.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you. I just would like for us to, I guess, to get something that is really, that seems to be workable. Because I mean, it's a wonderful program, and and I've got a lot of people that I represent that qualify for it, while I have a lot don't. But I'd certainly like for them to know about it that do, because it's a great advantage. But thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to note, most of the CDFI notes that you guys are discussing today are through nonprofits, and those nonprofits are all in all of our communities across the state. So
Sure.
I appreciate, I'm having Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may be somewhat of a, I guess, a question in reference to the forward plan in West Tennessee. I mean, this thing is going in all kinds of directions. And especially when you read, at some point, we're going to have thousands upon thousands of people converging on that community. Do you all anticipate or any development that may be reaching out to THDA about immediate development, et cetera, low income housing, temporary housing, et cetera, et cetera?
Say that to me in a different way.
Oh, okay. Well, based on the need for low-income housing, I think we're going to see a lot of that.
Yes, increased need, as you said, yes.
Exactly. We're going to see that. So do you all anticipate that to
We
happen?
do, and
Okay.
we have, we have lots of new federal programs right now that are helping folks with rental assistance, home, mortgages that are behind due to COVID-related activities. The increase in the CITC program, we have lots of programs that are trying to do our best to get as many units available and all across Tennessee to be, affordability is an issue for all of us.
Right.
And the more we can do to make that available across Tennessee, the more we win.
And we're certainly welcome to have conversations with local government officials about opportunities that may be needed or can be presented in those localities.
Exactly, Mr. Chairman. That's exactly where I was going.
Yeah.
If there will be a partnership or communications within those communities that are going to explode at some point.
That's a lot of what my team does. And I hope most of you receive emails from us on a monthly or every other month basis that are introducing you to the homeowners that we have, introducing you to the new programs that we have. And we do that with local elected officials and community groups as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Seeing no other, thank you guys for coming today and your testimony. Really appreciate it. David Giargano gets a blue ribbon since he's as the chair lady said, hasn't been here every day. I think he's been in this committee. This is his third time. I promise you I won't ask you next week. But anyways, thank you guys for coming and appreciate your participation today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, as they begin to exit, we have today is the tax credit calendar, as we call it. We have this was a discussion about a new and existing program. We also have a few minutes yet to discuss a new group that's coming in about new market tax credits, which are a little bit different. And Mr. Dressler with principal at Advantage Capital, I think he's on his way. Yeah, he's on his way down. So we'll give him a few minutes to get settled, and then we'll be back in just a second. All right, members. All right, members, we had a little issue there with communication or understanding. And so the members will try to reschedule this new market tax credits at a later time. Thank you. We are adjourned.